Imagine a town where the danger isn't on the streets, it's underneath them. No flames licking at windows. No sirens. Just heat rising through the ground, invisible gas in the basements, and a sense that something is moving below your feet, chewing through the earth, one chamber at a time. Welcome to Centralia, Pennsylvania, an American town undone by a fire you can't see. Centralia was like 100 other mining towns along the Appalachian coal seams, built on what it dug, kept alive by what it burned. Rows of modest houses. A few churches, a few bars, a few diners. Families who knew each other by name. The kind of place that only makes the news when something goes wrong. In the spring of 1962, people gathered near the cemetery just outside of town. There was a dump there, an eyesore that the borough council wanted gone before Memorial Day services. Someone set the pile alight. That was common enough. Burn the trash, rake the remains, move on. But this time the ground breathed back. There was a fissure at the base of the pit, a seam where surface rubble met old workings, abandoned mine shunny-combing the coal-rich rock below. The fire found that seam as neatly as a key finds a lock. Flames slipped under the town like a rumor, through old rooms and tunnels that had once been the town's pride. The very galleries where men had hacked anthracite loose, day after day, by lamplight. At first, nothing seemed different. There was a smell now and then. A patch of warm ground. Smoke curling up from a place it had no business coming from. People complained. The state dropped some fly ash into holes. Bulldozers closed a few gaps. On paper, the problem was addressed. Underground, it wasn't. Coal fires don't behave like campfires. They move by conduction and convection through tangled networks of old mine rooms, eating air wherever they find it, making their own weather. They starve, swell, and split. One day, a section smolders. The next, the roof collapses and the whole room roars to life. The fire grows without spectacle, picking and choosing from pillars of coal and forgotten ribs at the edges of old maps. In the 70s, Centralia started to understand what was really happening. Carbon monoxide alarms became part of the morning routine. Basements grew warm in winter even when the furnace was off. Patches of snow vanished on certain lawns long before spring. If you stood on a still day near the old Route 61, you could see wisps of steam rising from cracks, breath from a creature you never saw. Engineers came with plans. One scheme called for digging a trench to cut off the fire's oxygen. Another proposed flooding portions of the mine to smother the heat. Contracts were signed, money allocated, equipment rolled in. But the fire always seemed to move faster than the paperwork. Trenches collapsed. Budgets blew out. Winter shut operations down. By the time crews returned, the fire had jumped the line, slipped past a plug, found a forgotten airway, followed a timber line no one remembered. Living with it meant learning to read the ground. People stepped wide around cracks that weren't there last week. Kids learned to avoid certain lots. Dogs would stop, sniff, whine. If your nose stung or a headache arrived out of nowhere, you opened windows and you opened them wide. Then one day in 1981, the story got a face. A boy named Todd Domboski was walking in his grandmother's backyard when the ground simply gave way. The hole yawned open beneath him, a sudden vent, as if the backyard had decided to exhale. He dropped into a column of hot, bad air. The edges crumbled. But he caught a tree root, luck or reflex or both. A cousin heard the shouting, ran, and pulled him out. News cameras found Centralia. When the country saw that hole, when they heard underground mine fire delivered in a flat TV voice, that's when people started to understand. This wasn't a nuisance. This was a town perched over a problem that didn't care about maps, deeds, or mortgages. The federal government arrived not with a fix, but with a checkbook. If they couldn't stop the fire, maybe they could move the people. In the 1980s, a buyout began. House by house, block by block, Centralia emptied. People signed papers. Movers came. Goodbyes were said with casseroles and long hugs. Some left quickly, eager to put fear behind them. Others fought to stay. They hadn't dug the holes, they hadn't lit the match, and they didn't see why the answer should be to erase their lives. But the math was relentless. The mine fire could burn for decades, even centuries, drifting from seam to seam. The heat destabilized the ground. Gases pooled in low places. The air looked fine until it didn't. Insurance companies raised eyebrows. Banks lowered thumbs. One by one, the houses came down. Eminent domain took care of the last legal knots. By the early 1990s, Centralia was a skeleton, roads to nowhere, fire hydrants guarding empty lots, mailboxes without names. And yet, this is important, Centralia didn't die. People stayed. Not many, but enough to insist that their town was more than a line on a hazard map. A handful of residents fought the condemnation for years. Some won the right to live out their lives where they'd always lived. Up on a hill, the Ukrainian Catholic Church still held services, a clean white presence above the scrappy trees and the stitched earth. The living kept their rituals, the fire kept its silence. If you come here now, you won't find a spectacle. You'll find absence. The neat rows of houses are gone, replaced by a grid of grass and scrub that remembers where things were. The street signs look awkward, like labels for drawers in a cabinet that was taken away. The famous Graffiti Highway, a buckled stretch of the old Route 61 where visitors once painted names and neon slogans over the heaved asphalt, has been covered over, buried under truckloads of dirt to discourage trespass and injury. If you didn't know better, you might call it a field with an attitude problem. But Centralia doesn't need bright flames to tell its story. The potency here is in what you don't see. Coal seams smolder quietly in the dark, under pressure, at temperatures high enough to bake rock. The heat loosens clay and dries out soil until it slumps. Gases, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, sulfur compounds, move invisibly through cracks and old ventilation lines and the pores of the ground itself. A fire like this is a chemistry set with a very slow fuse. Engineers can describe it. They can show you a cross-section that looks like a layer cake. Ground, shale, coal seam, old mine rooms, more rock below. They can point to subsidence zones where roofs of old rooms collapse and the ground above sinks. They can talk about oxygen pathways, how a seam breathes through a chain of forgotten connections. But the shock of Centralia isn't in the diagrams. It's in the mood, the sensation that the most dangerous thing in town is quiet. So who's to blame? It's tempting to say the dump fire did it, and in a narrow sense that's true. But the deeper truth runs farther back. The moment a community mines a seam, punches corridors, leaves pillars, opens a new ecology under the fields, it changes the rules of what fire can do. For decades, that underground world fed stoves and paid mortgages. Then it became a liability map. You can't ask a town built over coal to pretend the coal isn't there. You can only ask it to count the costs honestly. Centralia made the news because it was visible, dramatic, and American. But the phenomenon isn't unique. Coal seam fires burn under China's deserts, in India's Jaria coal fields, in Indonesia, in patches of Australia. Stubborn, sprawling underground conflagrations that eat millions of tons of fuel and pump heat and gases into places that can't afford them. Some started with lightning strike or coal's own chemistry. Some began with exactly what happened here, a small surface fire finding a hidden world to live in. What do you do with that? You can try to dig it out, rip an open trench down to rock, carve away the fuel until the fire runs out of path. That's expensive, dangerous, and only works when the geometry is merciful. You can try to flood it if the mine is tight enough to hold water, and you can keep the pumps going long enough to drop the temperature below ignition. You can seal entries and hope starving it of oxygen will calm it down. All of these approaches work on paper. In the ground, they work until the seam remembers a crack no one put on the plan. So Centralia did something harsh and human. It moved. The fire won the land. the people took their lives elsewhere. A few stayed, and the law, after the necessary choreography of courts and signatures, learned to live with that too. The risk isn't gone even now. On a still, cold morning, your breath mixes with breath from the ground. On some days in winter, steam curls up from patches where the fire is closer to the surface. The air tastes metallic if you find the wrong spot. Visitors wander in for photos, chasing the thrill of an empty town. They post pictures, cracked asphalt swallowing weeds, lone poles and hydrants, a neat church in the distance. What they don't post is the part where you can't see danger, and that's the part that matters. If you come with respect. Stay off closed areas. Don't dig, don't pry at vent caps, don't test your tolerance for bad air. This isn't an urban playground, it's a laboratory with no supervision. It's easy to turn Centralia into a fable. Man meddles with nature, nature bites back. Or, government bungles a fix and buys a town instead. Or, here's what happens when we walk away from the bill. All of those readings contain a little truth. None of them contain enough. The story is messier, and messier stories are more useful. Centralia is about systems, industrial, legal, geological, social, and how they fail in asynchronous ways. The seam was mined in the 19th and early 20th centuries. The fire took off in the 1960s. The buyouts came in the 1980s. The last legal fights ended decades after that. Cause and effect stretch across generations. A choice that felt rational in one era, cut a nice grid of galleries through the coal, becomes someone else's unsolvable problem in another. If you live in a city with subways, tunnels, utility corridors, you live with the same lag. Every convenience that carves the earth leaves a promise tucked under the floorboards. Someone will have to keep that promise when the ground answers. There's a scene I think about. Two friends drive through on a gray day. They don't talk. They roll past a street sign that points to a street that isn't there. They stop where a lane meets nothing and step out. The air is still. Somewhere in the quiet, a bird calls. The asphalt is slightly warm under their shoes. They imagine the scene below them, dark, tight, hissing, doing slow old work. The world feels thinner here, closer to its own machinery. One looks at the other, as if to say, how did a town end like this? The answer is never one thing. The answer is accumulated. If you want a single moment to hold on to, go back to 1962, men doing a normal thing, burning a pile before Memorial Day, at the edge of a world their father's work had made. A wind shifts. A flame finds a seam. There's no crack of doom, no cinematic blaze. Just a kind of decision made by the ground. After that, it's years of incremental alarms and half-fixes, long meetings, hard checks, family fights, slow goodbyes. The fire is still down there. It has learned patience. It has nothing else to learn. It will continue to move along the seam, seeking air, finding it, losing it, resting, waking. In some cross-sections, the models say it could burn for a century or more. In others, they say the fire will stall, walls crumble, and a wet season will calm it. If you believe any prediction longer than a decade, you haven't listened to the ground. What Centralia offers the rest of us is clarity. The ground keeps score. We build, dig, and burn. The earth answers on its own schedule. Sometimes the answer looks like a sinkhole under a boy in his grandmother's yard. Sometimes it looks like a field where a town used to be. So we ask the only useful question left: how do we live above what we've made below? Carefully is the short answer. With records that outlive us. With caution where maps go pale. With budgets that don't pretend the ground is free. With humility about how long a promise lasts when you write it in coal. Centralia is quiet today. If you drive through, you might think the story is over. But endings in places like this are rarely endings. They're coexistences. Up on the hill, a church bell still rings. In the grid below, gas caps gleam on a few vent pipes like dull coins. Underneath, the slow machine works in the dark, unbothered by headlines. The town that burned without flames is still teaching. It's not asking for pity. It's asking for attention. Would you live here knowing that the most important thing about your town is the thing you never see? Would you stand on warm asphalt and call it home? Or would you pack a truck and take the buyout and carry your story elsewhere and try not to look back when the wind blows through the trees? However you answer, remember this. Centralia didn't vanish because it was weak. It shifted because it was wise enough, finally, to respect a force that doesn't negotiate. Sometimes survival looks like stubbornness. Sometimes it looks like leaving. And sometimes, when the ground is the enemy and the only way out is up, survival looks like a road that climbs a hill to a church that still stands, overlooking a town that learned to put safety before pride. That's Centralia. The longer you stay, the louder the quiet sounds. And if you listen closely, you can hear it. Not sirens, not shouting, just the thin sound of the earth, working through a mistake, one hot breath at a time. Subscribe to DarkCurio for more forbidden places and hidden history. Tell me in the comments, would you ever set foot in a town that burns underground?